All right, hey guys, I just hit level 100 in hardcore recently, and I want to give you guys some leveling tips on how to get there efficiently, quickly, and safely, especially if you're playing on hardcore, but also the fastest possible way that I know. So the number one best method to level your character once you're past level 50 or so is Nightmare Dungeons. And very recently, they just changed how Nightmare Dungeons work. So I've got a Nightmare Dungeon here. Let's just open this one up. You right-click it, and then basically it activates. You can go straight to your map, and it's going to show you exactly which Nightmare Dungeon you just activated. You can just left click that and instantly travel there. This is so much better than how it used to be, especially with some of the dungeons that were out of the way, where just travel, like this one's fine, the waypoint's right here, but you know, one of them, you know, like this one right here, Dark Ravine, was one of the hardest to get to. You had to take such a long winding route in order to get to it, and so this is so much better to be able to teleport to Nightmare Dungeons. So Nightmare Dungeons were just buffed. It's so much better now in order to get around. Not only that, they also made it so that Nightmare Dungeons give you an 80% bonus XP than previously. So they give so much more XP. Nightmare Dungeons, essentially, even the developers came out and said that it's your number one best way for leveling in the end game. Along with that, they also nerfed regular dungeons. So, you know, if you used to do, you know, some of these regular dungeons with like a group or something, just because they were the best, you know, S tier dungeon, that's no longer an effective strategy. So truly, Nightmare Dungeons are the best way to level. Now, there is some nuance to Nightmare Dungeons that I want to talk about that is going to basically make it much more efficient than if you didn't know about these things. So I actually have pulled up here a spreadsheet which details the best Nightmare Dungeon to do for your level. Basically what I wrote here is that there are ideal levels for each Nightmare tier. You want to be at least 3 levels lower than the enemy you're fighting for the maximum amount of XP gain. It's going to be, I think, 25 to 35% more XP if you're 3 levels lower. So in this graph here, I have your level, the Nightmare tier, and then the monster level for that corresponding Nightmare tier. So you can see here, if you're level 51, you want to be fighting monsters that are 3 levels higher than you for maximum XP gain. For minimum added difficulty, level 54. There's actually no advantage to fighting monsters more than 3 levels higher than you from an XP standpoint. There's actually, it just cuts off, so there's no more bonus experience. So really, it's the optimal way to level your character. If you are 3 levels lower, it's going to be the fastest clear because they're not going to be too much stronger, and you're also going to maximize your XP. So here you go, from level 51 to 99, right? So if you're trying to just to get to level 100, you'll never have to do a Nightmare tier higher than 48 in order to get max level in the most efficient way. If you want to do it slower, you could of course just do maybe tier 46 over and over to fight level 100 monsters, and that's still somewhat efficient, but it's not maximizing your XP gain. Okay, so those are the Nightmare tier levels you should go after. Now, not every Nightmare dungeon is created equally. Here we have a tier list of the best Nightmare dungeons. Now, when I say best, I basically just mean monster density, how quickly can you clear the dungeon. It's actually not all created equally. I've done all of these dungeons over and over and over, and you start to get a feel for how long certain dungeons take, and you can definitely feel like some of them are a massive waste of time, I have to be honest. There's like huge amounts of backtracking, you know, the objective is tedious, it's hard to find, you know, the last thing you have to turn in order to open that gate, you know, etc., right? Now, absolutely the best dungeon I have found is Blind Burrows because it's so fast, it's small, you're able to quickly find the objectives, which, you know, you just follow the wall and there you can find the 3 corrupted villagers you need to slay, and then the doorway opens. But not only that, it has very nice high monster density. It has those spider hosts which explode and get even more monsters created, so that the XP gain is there. You can get tons of XP. Gulran Canals is very similar to Blind Burrows. Sunken Ruins is so fast. A lot of drowned in there, and you can find those objectives so fast, and so on. So these are the best Nightmare dungeons to do for leveling up your sigils because it's fast, but also maximizing your XP gain. Now, I do want to mention that you are going to most likely get your sigils leveled up without even worrying about it. Now, if you look at my character here, I'm going to switch back to Diablo. This character got all of its sigils maxed out before I even reached level 100, and so I started leveling up sigils I didn't even need before I reached max level because, well, I leveled all of mine to max, and I'm using 5 sigils. So if that's any indicator for, you know, sigil leveling, hopefully it'll just show that, hey, you don't need to go out of your way to try to level sigils. It kind of just happens naturally. That was my experience. You can see I'm using 5 different sigils. Now, some builds may use more than 5, so if you're playing a build that uses 6, I could could see you reaching max level without leveling all your sigils. So if you're playing a build with 6 glyphs, then absolutely try to optimize for leveling your glyphs, because glyphs are so powerful. It's absolutely worth at least getting them to 15, because with this particular build, it wouldn't even work. They wouldn't meet the requirements unless they were at least level 15, because their radius increases once you reach level 15, and it allows you to more easily activate it without having to go out of your way. And you can see you can be much more efficient with branching out without, you know, oh, I want to branch over here just for that little particular node, right? And so getting them to level 15 is very important. And if you are playing a 6 sigil or 6 glyph build, then you're gonna have to play it a little differently. But if you're playing just 5 glyphs, you'll be just fine, not worrying about going out of your way to get levels for those glyphs. Now, one other important thing I want to talk about is sigil affixes. So going to switch over back to the spreadsheet. There are certain affixes that are really terrible and I just avoided. And I've actually tried them at least once to experience it. And there are certainly, these are the ones that I honestly think are just the worst and really slow you down. So these are the ones I recommend you avoid. Number 1, lightning storm. This one is very annoying because you have to stop everything you're doing and run to the protection dome. So there's this little glowing, it almost looks like a sigil that's like floating around. It follows you. And then it makes this sort of ringing noise moments before it creates a protective dome, and then lightning strikes, and you have to be inside that dome or you take massive damage. This affix is terrible because it forces you to stop what you're doing, right? And if you're trying to level as fast as you can, it really slows you down, because this happens over and over and over throughout the entire Nightmare dungeon. Frankly, it's annoying, it slows you down, and if you're playing hardcore, it honestly has the chance to kill you, right? Like if it creates a dome and then you walk through one of those rooms that closes behind you, you have a high chance of dying there because you literally can't get into the dome anymore. And so this is one affix I just completely started avoiding because, number 1, there's a chance to die, and number 2, it just slows you down way too much. I also avoid resource burn. Resource burn, I thought, you know, it's not so bad. I play a druid and I have earth and might, so I can get all my resource back. Even with getting all of my resource back, you know, lucky hit, I was still super resource deprived. You can see here different monster types will reduce your resistance or your resources a different amount. It's terrible. You're gonna have no resource whatsoever. Now, if you have a lot of abilities that don't require resource, like trample or, you know, hurricane, things like that, you know, it's nice to be able to use that, but it's really, you know, it's really so much better to be able to use your core skills that require a resource. So I just completely avoided resource after trying it one time. It was awful. Now, armor breakers. Armor is by far the best stat in Diablo 4, for, you know, defensive stat. Not only does it increase your physical damage reduction, it also increases all elemental resistances. It's really just overpowered. The developers even said they're going to try to buff resistances because armor is just so good. With that in mind, if there is a monster that reduces your armor, that makes it one of the most powerful you know, monsters you can face. Now, I remember going and trying, I think, a tier 50 with armor breakers, and yeah, I was taking a lot more damage than I was used to. It was very scary, and I said, no, I'm not doing this again. Armor breakers, if you're playing hardcore, definitely one to avoid. If you don't care about maybe potentially dying, then maybe you can go with this affix, but generally, I think most people don't want to die, and so I would avoid armor breakers. I think that's a very scary one. And then finally, potion breakers. I think potion breakers is scary on paper. I did one, and I didn't feel terrible, but not being able to use your healing potion, I think, is just something that as a hardcore player doesn't sit well with me. So this is one I would avoid. Now generally, if you're a very tanky class, and honestly I don't feel like I really needed to use potions, especially because I was playing a very high self-heal build with Blood Howl, so you can just constantly heal yourself with that anyways. So with my particular build, I felt like, you know, potion breakers isn't the end of the world, but I just don't like the fact, especially if you're playing hardcore, that you can't use your potion. Then finally, one of the affixes I definitely think everyone should, you know, keep an eye out for and avoid is different resistance affixes. So depending on your build, you know, you could find one that says monster has physical resist. They'll take 40% less damage from physical damage, or 60% less damage from critical strikes, or distant, right? And if this is your primary way of playing your character, it's something you definitely want to avoid. So for example, if you are entirely ranged, don't get that 60% reduced damage from ranged attacks, or 60% reduced damage from melee attacks, right? Now, as you know, my build in particular, throwing tornadoes, you can move into melee range or go out into ranged, and you can kind of have some flexibility with that. So if you're playing a class that is mostly ranged, but you're okay with going up in melee and dealing damage because you're tanky enough, then you can get around that. But just keep that in mind. Those resists are really strong and can definitely slow down your progression through different nightmare dungeons. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is Hell Tides. Now, Hell Tides are something that you have to do. I even tried doing some Hell Tides near level 99 when I was close to max level, taking a break, just trying to test it out. And I can tell you with complete confidence, Hell Tides are not for leveling your character. It was so much slower. I felt it. The monster density isn't there. And most importantly, the monsters within Hell Tides are only 2 levels higher than you. So you're not getting that full 25 plus XP from having monsters 3 levels higher than you. So it's absolutely not something you want to do over and over. However, Hell Tides are extremely important for this particular currency called Forgotten Souls. Now, I've used up most of my Forgotten Souls because they're used to re-roll, they're used to upgrade your items to the final tier. They're very valuable, actually, and you can only get them from Hell Tides. So Forgotten Souls are super important for that reason, and you have to do them to get Forgotten Souls. So what I would recommend early on when you just hit World Tier 3 or 4, definitely go out of your way and do those Hell Tides and try to accumulate as many Forgotten Souls as possible. And, you know, I made a really great Hell Tide video. You can check that one out. But, you know, boiled down, you know, check out where those mystery chests are. Definitely fight all of the bosses you can find, especially like the Hell Tide Assassin. All these drop really nice amounts of Forgotten Souls. And so try to gather as many as you can during those Hell Tides. Once you have enough, really just don't do Hell Tides at all because it's just not worth it. It's so much better to just do the right tier nightmare dungeon to level your character. And that's basically it. That's how I reached level 100 on hardcore. You can see I got the title Tempered Champion, and it honestly isn't so bad. The hardest part is just choosing the right nightmare dungeon affixes, making sure you're doing the right level nightmare dungeon, and the rest is easy peasy. Good luck on your leveling journey, and I hope this helpful. If it was, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.